I want to take a look at a few more ways in which we can group eighth notes. And we've seen a couple of ways in which we can group eighth notes. For instance, we looked at a group of 4 eighth notes and we said, well, what if we tie the first 2 eighth notes together like this? We would come up with a rhythm that looks like this. 2 eighth notes tied together would be equivalent to a quarter note, followed by 2 eighth notes like this. So the figure on the left, 1 and 2 and ta, 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 sounds exactly the same as the rhythmic figure on the right. 1 and 2 and ta, ta, ta. So that's one way I can group them together. Another way I can group them together is, what if I group together the last 2 eighth notes? I'm going to tie those last 2 eighth notes together. And I could also write that this way, as 2 eighth notes, followed by a quarter note, because we know a quarter note, again, is equal to 2 eighth notes tied together. So that would be 1 and 2 and ta, ta, ta. Both of these measures sound exactly the same. Just 2 different ways of writing them. And then we also saw a way that we could tie together the middle 2 eighth notes of this group of 4. So 1 and 2 and ta, ta, ta. And we said we can also write that like this. An eighth note followed by a quarter note, because again, the 2 eighth notes tied together exactly like a quarter note, followed by another eighth note, just like that. 1 and 2 and ta, ta, ta. That gives us a little bit of a syncopated figure. Okay, so those are basically all the ways that we can tie together 2 eighth notes. The first 2, the second 2, and the third 2 that are in a group of 4. Okay, but what if we tried to tie together 3 eighth notes? What if we tied together the first 2 eighth notes of 1 and then tied that one more time to a third eighth note? So the way that I would perform this actually is, I would say ta on my first eighth note. I would hold that ta for the and of 1 and then beat 2, or the beginning of beat 2, and then I would say ta yet again on the and of 2 like that. So if I were to say that, in rhythm, 1 and 2 and ta, ta. You can actually hear that if I loop it. I'm going to use these repeat symbols that I've written here on the ends of my measure to just go back and loop that figure. You can hear it a little bit more clearly when I loop it. Let me do this with the metronome. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and ta, 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 ta. And actually, I should have added an eighth note to that last one. So it should be ta, 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 ta. There we go. So we don't actually know yet a way to write this, or an alternate way to write this, other than tying 3 eighth notes together. So I'm going to introduce a new musical symbol to you right now, and that is the dotted quarter note. And a dotted quarter note means hold a note for 1.5 beats. It's just a quarter note with a dot. And that means hold a note for the equivalent of 3 eighth notes tied together, or 1.5 beats. So this figure, the dotted quarter note with an eighth note, that dotted quarter would cover 1 and 2, and then that eighth note at the end would cover and. So I would perform it exactly the same way. Say ta, I'd hold that ta for the and of 1 into 2, and then say ta one more time on the end. So again, the way that I perform the measure on the left is exactly the way that I would perform the measure on the right. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and ta, 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 ta. And I could do the opposite as well. I could tie together the last 3 eighth notes. Instead of tying together the first 3 eighth notes, I could tie together the last 3 eighth notes. And let's actually try that. So I'm going to tie together this eighth note and this eighth note. So now the way I'm going to perform this is I'm going to say ta on beat 1, like this. Then I'm going to say another ta on the and of 1. And then I'm going to hold that ta through beat 2 and the and of 2. So if I were to perform that in a loop, it would sound like this. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and ta-ta, 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 ta-ta. So the way I would write this, or an alternate way that I could write this, would be I could write an eighth note followed by, let me make a better flag here, an eighth note followed by a dotted quarter note. Remember, a dotted quarter note means hold this for 3 eighth notes, or hold this for a beat and a half. So again, I would say ta on beat 1, and then I would say ta on the and of 1, and then I would hold that ta for beat 2 and the and of 2. I'd perform it exactly the same way. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and ta-ta, 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 ta-ta. By the way, that musical symbol, the dot, when we use it in relation to rhythmic values, the dot actually has a definition. It means hold a note or add 50% of the value of a note to that particular note. So for instance, we saw the dot in relationship to the half note. The half note, normally a half note is 2 beats long, right? But what if we add 50%? What is 50% of 2? 50% of 2 is 1, or half of 2 is 1. So we're going to add that 2 to the 1, and if we add the 2 plus the 1, the 2 beat note plus the 1 beat note, that comes out to be a dotted half note. So that dot means add 50% of the value to a note, if you're really interested in sort of the mathematics of it. If you're not, that's okay. Just remember, a dotted half note is 3 beats, and a dotted quarter note is 3 eighth notes. So let's actually see how this could work in our basic rhythmic training example. So let's take a look at number 54, which is the first example that we have that has a dotted quarter note in it. Okay, so we're in 2/4 time. So we're going to start out with our dotted quarter. Our dotted quarter is going to be 1 and 2. Then we have an eighth note, which is going to happen on the and of the beat. Then we have another dotted quarter note, which will cover those 3 eighth notes, 1 and 2. Then another eighth note on the and. Then we have that syncopated figure, 1 and 2 and then just a plain old half note, which will cover all 2 of the beats. So if I were laying out where my tas are going to go, I'm going to say ta on beat 1. I'm going to hold that ta through the and of 1 and beat 2. Then I'm going to say ta again on the and of 2. This next measure is exactly the same. Ta on beat 1. Hold that ta for the and for the 2. And then say ta again on my last eighth note. Then ta on beat 1. Ta on the and of 1. Hold that ta for the beginning of beat 2. And then ta on the and of 2. And then finally, in the fourth measure of this example, I'm going to say ta on beat 1, and then I'm going to hold that ta for the and, to, and. So if I were to perform the first line of number 54, and just remember number 54 is 2 lines long, so we want to learn both of these lines. But if I were just to perform the first line, it would sound like this. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and ta, 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 ta. So I'm going to let you learn the second line on your own and try to figure out the second line on your own. We have more dotted quarter notes, but this time they're in that other configuration where we have the 8th note first, followed by the dotted quarter. And look at this, we have a tie that is going to tie the dotted quarter in the second measure of the second line to an 8th note in the third measure of the second line. So you have all the tools that you need to figure this out. So take a minute and see if you can figure it out as you are learning to perform this.